All right. Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening to everybody, depending on where you're dialing in from. I see people joining the virtual conference. Thank you for joining us. This is our. If you want to go to the next slide, let me see if we can get to all the technical issues out of the way. Are we ready to move on to the next slide?
Yep, we just did.
Okay. I think I must just have a little delay. I wonder if it's paused by any chance. I'm still seeing that first slide. Maybe it's me.
Yeah, me too, Mark. No, I'm seeing the first slide too. Okay. Yeah, it's been on there for about 45 seconds.
Interesting. Well, sorry. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon again. My name is Mark Becker. I'm the founding partner of Cathexis Partners, and I'm happy to introduce each session in today's conference. This is the third session in today's virtual peer-to-peer world conference. The title of it is Sponsorships, Who to Ask, How to Ask, and What to Ask For. And I'm going to be handing it off to Rachel here in a moment. But before I do, I just want to say thanks again to the different companies that are hosting today's virtual conference. Accelerate Charity Growth, Cathexis Partners, HepData, Op3, and Twilio.org. So thanks again for all those sponsors, and thank you to the attendees. You will notice in the GoToWebinar control panel that there is a questions and answers area. Feel free to ask any questions in there. Obviously, with the number of attendees that we have in this session, we can't have everybody unmuted. That would just be out of control. So everybody is muted except for the presenters, but feel free to ask your questions along the way, and we'll get to those as soon as possible. And without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Rachel.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Mark, and welcome everybody, and thanks to Katie for joining me today. So I think there's a little bit of a delay with the advancing of the slides, so you might hear that we're kind of talking to something that's not necessarily on the screen, but hopefully the content will be so riveting that you guys will be able to follow along. So first I wanted to just introduce myself. My name is Rachel Collins, formerly Armbruster, formerly Kubicki. So for those of you that recognize the picture in a second, but not the name, I am with Accelerated Charity Growth, ACG for short, and we've been around since 2009 working with nonprofits like yourselves, helping with all things fundraising, whether that's strategy development for peer-to-peer programs, it's branding, board engagement for fundraising, or just general fundraising strategy development. And I am so thankful that my co-presenter, Katie Cooper, is from the National Hemophilia Foundation, and she is the National Walk Manager there. And works alongside Tracy Earle, who some of you might know. And so Katie and I, and we're not really going to get into this, but Katie and I have worked on the last year or so rebranding the National Hemophilia Foundation's walk program. And so we're piloting that this fall and then releasing it for the larger program in the spring. So it's been an honor to work with her, and I've just really been fascinated by her background and experience in all things peer-to-peer. And so I thought it would be great for you guys to get a little bit of her insights when it comes to sponsorships as well. So the first thing that, you'll see in a second, an image, when I started thinking about this presentation and kind of the who, what, how piece of it, it kept reminding me of the old, and this is going to date me, obviously, but the old Abbott and Costello show, Who's on First? And sometimes it just feels like that. Sometimes selling sponsorship feels like, where am I going? Who am I talking to? Did I close that deal? Did I not? And sometimes it's just hard to determine heads or tails, or if you're coming or going. So hopefully we'll be able to help you make sense of all of that. So we're going to focus really on three main areas of sponsorship. And the first one is the who. So talking about which sponsors, which companies to approach, but also who at your organization should be involved and when. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the how. Sometimes it feels a little bit like fairy dust and crystal balls and that kind of thing when it comes to sponsorships, but there really is kind of a process to this as far as kind of the steps in the process and to really make it more of an elegant dance instead of something that feels a little bit more choppy and off, as you will. So the what on the next slide is really this idea of kind of what is it that we're really trying to do, what are we trying to sell, what are we trying to make happen. So a lot of that has to do with the customer service feedback and really providing excellent customer service and being friendly and really building relationships. So we're going to talk about what does it look like and how to make it happen. So let's start first on the who with the sponsors. So let's see, Katie, just so you know, I'm on the prospect list building and kind of what all falls under the who on slide 13 if we want to forward it. But the things that we want to cover in the who section are the prospect list building, how to prioritize it, who's going to make the ask, and then who to talk to at the company as well, because that's always a little bit of a moving target. So when we talk about prospect list building, it's really this idea of constantly scanning for new opportunities or relationships. One of the places, that I've looked, and Katie, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about your experience with prospect list building and where you feel like we need to start and where people have their best chance for success.
Absolutely. So you always want to start with the people that you already know. So looking at your current team captains, your top fundraisers, your committee members, your key volunteers, getting to know where they work in their sphere of influence and what kind of reach that they have internally. We also want to start thinking about the importance of collecting and diving for data within those current participants. We know it's not realistic to think that we know every one of our walkers or constituents, but if your platform allows, adding their employer as an option can be really fruitful and can help you identify some new prospects, or also to look at your prospect list that you currently have and say, wow, I didn't realize that we had so many people who worked for General Electric. So by adding that to your fundraising platform and asking that information from your constituents, you'll be able to pull reports that can help you identify those prospects, find those warmer leads within companies who are on your prospect lists. We also want to use those friends of our organization to create those warm leads and make those introductions into those companies. Once you identify where your walkers work or do business, they can help you learn about the philanthropic priorities and goals of that company to help you do your research and to ask leading questions to help that first meeting be as informative as possible. Your prospect list should also always be changing and evolving. We should constantly be adding and changing the priorities and rankings of our prospects. It's really meant to be a living and breathing document that evolves as your organization grows and changes and as you start making connections in the community. Rachel, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think the only other thing, just getting into some of the practical, sometimes we overlook some of the lowest hanging fruit. So as an example, I've had some of my biggest success with some of these sponsorships by looking at our vendor list. So just asking the accounting and finance department to literally print a list of everyone we've ever sent a check to as an organization. And sometimes they're not the sponsor, but sometimes they can lead me to that because maybe they have other clients or maybe they're aware of other networking relationships that they could leverage to help us. But they're interested in helping us. And so it kind of takes a little bit of that burden off. So I think anytime you guys can think about creatively ways to find new leads, same thing with, team captains. I know Katie talked a little bit about looking within the participants from a database standpoint, but another way to really do that is, when you're having those one-on-one conversations with team captains or significant fundraisers for your peer-to-peer program, letting them know that you're really looking for organization-wide sponsorships. And we'll talk a little bit later about how to help them and how to really paint the picture of who it is exactly that you're looking for to have the best success. But taking a look at some of those folks within. The other thing that we've been doing a lot lately, which has been kind of interesting, is being able to look at kind of pulling a list of all companies with, over 25 employees within a 50-mile radius, or say 25-mile radius even, of your event site or your activity. If it's something that's happening live, if it's something that people are traveling to, you could change that up a bit. But basically, by putting that list together, what we were able to do is put that in front of our executive director and in front of our board members and some of the other team members and team captains, and say, do you know anybody on this list? And they maybe knew about 25%. And they said, oh, I didn't even think about calling them, or I didn't even realize they were that close. So one of the things that did for us was, then we were able to put the rest of the list in kind of a tier 3, but we moved everyone that had some kind of a mark next to their name into our first tier, and we immediately had a connection. So sometimes when you just generally say to people, do you have any prospects for me for sponsorship? That's, they kind of get a blank stare and say all of a sudden they don't know anyone. But if you do a little bit of the digging and a little bit of the research, and then you're really just asking them to review the list, then it seems like they seem more eager to kind of help out and draw those connections. I've even gone so far as to take our prospect list and then match it up against our everyone's LinkedIn to say, I actually found that you're connected to these 3 companies, so can we talk this way? So just looking at your prospect list as far as where to find folks, looking at newspaper articles, at online business journals, who's moving into the city that is looking for marketing opportunities. Anytime there's maybe a story or feature that happens to hit on your cause in some way that's connected to a business. So just constantly, like Katie said, constantly scanning the landscape to try to find new opportunities and new folks. But then, and we'll talk about it in a second about prioritizing them once you find those leads. But the first step is that giant funnel and getting as many names as possible on the list. So the next thing really is looking at, prioritizing that list. So once you've built it, once you have, okay, I've got 500 names, or I've got 100, or even I've got 20, how do you decide what to do first? And the second bullet there, A to Z, just don't do it. That's because a lot of times I've found with folks that I've worked with and staff that I've worked with, the prospect list gets built and it gets sorted, and then you say, okay, I've got time to make 3 calls a day, and you start calling with the A's, and you never really make it to the Z's, and it turns out that a company that starts with T was actually your greatest sponsorship opportunity, but you didn't really prioritize them with any kind of thought process, I guess, as far as kind of selection criteria, and so it made your job a lot harder. And so the first thing to do is really start ranking your prospects, and one way to do that is to really know your selection criteria. And what I mean by that is know what are the things that help determine greatest chance of success. Retention obviously is your first priority, is getting people that have been on board, re-signing them, getting them to re-up. So that gets a huge weight as far as the scoring process. But the rest of the selection criteria could be that there's an executive that is touched by your cause, that they have a large running club if it's a running event, or a cycling club if it's a cycling event. So you have to decide for your organization what is your selection criteria, and then not only rank your prospects, and the way that I do it is actually on a scale of 1 to 10. I give everybody a score, and then I resort by the total number. And then if we want to get complicated, we'll do weighted averages, like I said, on retention, or maybe mission, location-based, those kinds of things. But at least then I've got kind of an order of, most likely to say yes, and where I think we're going to actually be able to help them the most as well. The other piece to that I would mention with everyone here is just making sure that you share that selection criteria. That can save you guys time and energy down the road when you have a board member or a well-meaning participant that says, why aren't you calling Walmart, or why aren't you calling H-E-B, or why aren't you calling Amazon? You're able to then share with them, okay, well, that's a great company and I love everything they stand for. If we grade them up based on our selection criteria, you can see that they actually fall 500th on the list. And so I'm going to focus my time and energy here, here, and here. If you know something I don't know, then please let me know, and then I'll change the ranking, and then they'll move up on the list, and then I'll reach out as soon as possible. If that's a contact, if that's something else. But at least, too, when you share that information, it really makes it so that everyone can be helpful to you instead of you feeling like you're spinning your wheels with prospects that you're researching prospects, you're reaching out to prospects, you're writing grant applications for sponsorships online to random systems, and you know in your heart that that's not really where the money's going to come from. So being able to take a look at that and share that selection criteria can be important. And then I think one of the things, Katie, that you and I had talked quite a bit about was the teams and sponsorship concept and how that ranks with this as well. So maybe you want to add to that?
Absolutely. So when Rachel and I were talking, we wanted to make sure that one of the things, and you'll see it on that image on the slide, is that not only do we want to track the pipeline for corporate sponsorships, but really looking at the value of corporate teams and engaging them in our peer-to-peer fundraising events. They have huge value and potential, and you want to consider that as you build out that prospect list, even if they're starting on your prospect list as a corporate team that has the potential to roll into a sponsorship. Some of my largest corporate sponsorships, and I'm thinking of Sawyer Gas in Jacksonville, have come from a family team who opened the door for a corporate team who then saw the value of getting their brand in front of our constituent base and just had to be a part of it. And then the walk experience is that magical day that can really showcase the value of the proposition to that partner on a larger scale. So every year they're coming back and they're more engaged and they want to do more and more. So we wanted to make sure that we included that on that corporate pipeline example. And we're also going to be sharing a document with you after that kind of ties all of these images together so you can look at them all in one place. But we're going to move on to the next slide. And take a look at a sample prospect list that I've used in the past and go through some of those key components. So as Rachel mentioned, it's really essential that we never sort our list from A to Z alphabetically, but we really rank them thoughtfully and continue to change their rank as you steward them and research those prospects. So what do we mean by ranking? We typically recommend ranking with an A, B, or C level. So your A's are your warm leads. A meeting can easily be secured with that person. There's a relationship that already exists. Your B's are those lukewarm leads. Maybe they're a lapsed partner or a relationship exists between a constituent and that prospect. Your C's are your cold leads. A connection doesn't necessarily exist with the prospect, but work is needed be done to identify that connection. And, we think about those C's, we really want to keep those C's on there as our wish list. And I'm getting that you guys are still on that last slide, so I'm going to try to advance that again in the hopes that you start seeing that. And if not, we will be sending that corporate sponsor template out to you guys after the presentation. But going back, we do want to keep those C's on our wish list so that we can share that list with our board members and our committee, or even our corporate partners can really be helpful to get some minds on the types of companies that we're looking for. And so those C's are the people that we want to be sharing. I mean, we want to share our entire prospect list with all of our community members, but it's a really great place to kind of just start building out who should be at the table. As you rank their potential, based on the research that you've done, always consider putting in some team dollar targets to always keep that front and center. That in our perfect world, they would be our corporate partner as a sponsor and a team. It's definitely where we would get the best return on our investment and they would get the best overall experience. That corporate team also allows us to go in and do a kickoff party so we're able to engage more of those constituents. We can also work with our leadership team to build out a fun and engaging fundraising and recruitment plan. But you can also sort this document by their sponsor or team target amount as you decide where to start and how to prioritize your time. You want to start with those that have the warmest leads or that can yield the highest revenue. All right, so the next piece, we added to prioritizing your prospect list the importance of having a communication strategy by tier. So hopefully you're seeing that prioritizing your prospect list where we added having a communication strategy by tier. But it's really important not just to have communication strategies, but different communication strategies for every tier. Your A's are going to be more frequent. Perhaps they're going to be more thank you and impact messaging heavy if they've been involved with your association, with your organization. Your B's will be targeted to help them feel that fire in the belly and create that sense of urgency to be a bigger part of your mission, but more importantly, so that they can see the value in the partnership with your organization. All of your communication should be centered around what you know about the philanthropic goals of the organization, sharing the great fundraising that their coworker did on behalf of their family team, or sending demographic information about your audience so that they can further understand the reach of the program. They will most likely connect to and show the brand reach. And of course, as you get to know your companies, their communication plan should really reflect and be tailored to the interest to create that mutually beneficial experience. So let's go ahead and take a look at a sample communication plan. And I'm going to give it.
I'm going to add really quick, Katie, on that. One of the things that I think is important for everybody when you're thinking about sponsorships, especially, one of the things that I think is important as the sponsorship sales folks is that we make sure that we're sharing information that is not already not known or readily available. So it's not that we're just regurgitating what's on the website or what's in a sponsorship deck, but more importantly, we're sharing really key insights into the organization and into, more importantly, the community that we represent, because I think that's where they learn to value our input and our phone calls and our emails, because if they need us, if they want insights on their customers, if they want to learn about a new target market, we are someone that they feel like really kind of has their finger on the pulse of this audience, and so then they're able to use us and leverage us, and then we ourselves become kind of a piece of the benefits that they're receiving because of those sponsorships. So I think part of that communication strategy, like Katie said, it's sharing those insights, but make sure that you're kind of holding back a few key insights that you can share in those, phone calls, voicemails, or those one-on-one meetings with those folks, so that they feel like every time you call or you reach out, maybe you have, a little nugget here and there that you're trying to share with them. So making it personal.
Fantastic.
Okay, I'll let you.
Hopefully you guys are seeing the sample of the communication plan on your screen. But this is a sample of a corporate communication plan. And as you can see here, but you'll actually see even better in the 2-page document that you guys will have access to after this call, is that it's really incredibly important for your communication plan to be specific to that organization. But this is a great place to start, because you do want to use a multi-channel, means of communication. You want those in-person meetings, those telephone calls, those social media shout-outs, and those hard mailings. Emails are obviously really important, but nothing beats that magic of that in-person meeting or phone call connection, where once you have that initial in-person or telephone call, you can really connect with somebody and really increase your chances of them being responsive to you moving forward. You'll also see in the sample plan that it's important to layer touch points from various points within your organization. Sometimes it's you as a development professional, but sometimes the criteria could certainly warrant a call from your CEO or your board chair. Perhaps having a family that chooses your services and having them call that corporation and thank them on their behalf. The point is to touch them throughout the year, and the other point is to really have those touch points that will be meaningful and unique to them. Again, that full document will be available on the conference website, but I also wanted to mention that Google alerts, which you don't see here, are really fantastic to get notifications when your company is in the news. It can really open the door and give you the opportunity to congratulate them, perhaps give you an opportunity to share their great news on your own social networks or emails to show you that they're paying attention and that you're really a true partner. All right, moving on to part 2, the who.
And just as a reminder, too, as you guys are going along, if you have specific questions for Katie or I or that kind of thing, please feel free to enter that in the questions section of the go-to meeting, and Mark and Katie and I will try to answer those either as we go or at the end. We'll save some time for Q&A as well. And I also provided our contact information at the end so that you guys have have our contact info so that if you're working on something down the road, you can even reach out at that point. So let's talk a little bit about the who. So when I started thinking about the who, one of the things images that kept coming back into my mind was that Night at the Roxbury skit with SNL. Again, maybe dating myself, but if you guys remember Will Ferrell and I can't remember the other guy's name, but they would stand at the bar and somebody would look towards them and it was like a you, me, him, and pointing back and forth. And so, it seems like sometimes too that's a little bit of the process as far as on our side, who's taking the lead on the sponsorships, who's not only doing the first initial outreach, but then actually closing the deals and then following up on benefits delivery, and where does it transition from fundraising into maybe an events team or back and forth. And so I think it really, at the end of the day, every organization is going to be a little bit different. What you want to make sure that you're focusing on is who has the greatest chance for success and who is going to close that sponsor. I've been in some situations where I will admit to you all, I am not a cat person, but for the program that we were working on, we were approaching an organization that their sponsorship had to do with cats. And even though I was the sponsorship director at the time, I reached out to someone on my development team because I knew that they had 3 cats, and this was something that they were passionate about. And so I was able to basically educate them on what we wanted to have happen with this sponsor. And then I made sure that I took them to all of our activities, our meetings, our calls, because it really helped them to kind of see that there's a culture match between our organization and theirs. So, silly example, but I think what I'm hoping it shows you is that sometimes you have to be willing to say, like, okay, is it me? Is it him? Is it her? Who has the best chance for success? And it's not always the one person that has, sponsorship director or sponsorship manager or event manager in their title. So I would encourage you guys to really think through who you have on the teams on a much broader scale, whether it's board members, team captains, top fundraisers over the years, that kind of thing that you might be able to leverage to close a deal, and that it is generally a team effort. The other thing I would say with that too is you're going to have multiple touch points, so you want to be sure that you're, maybe even bringing different people in at different moments. At the end of all of that, though, the one thing that I would say is that you do have to figure out who at the end of the day is going to be accountable for closing those deals and really tracking the progress there. The next thing that I really wanted to talk about, and you guys can see, I obviously worked quite a bit with Nike in my day because they love images, and they think a picture, says a lot, so I keep thinking that way. But when I think about let's talk about who at the company to approach. It's a little bit of like the Wizard of Oz and who's behind the curtain and trying to figure out, sometimes you get to someone and you feel like you're talking to the right person, and then it turns out that they're not even the one with the budget, or they're not the one that's the decision maker. And so that becomes kind of a challenge. So there are a lot of services and places to go to find out who to ask. Obviously using LinkedIn can be a huge resource. In some cases, your CRM can provide some insights, whether that's Salesforce or Blackbot or that kind of thing as well. They have different business intelligence modules that you're able to use. But there are services such as the List Inc. or Winmo that can provide contact information as well. The other way that I've had a lot of success is actually looking at old press releases and media interviews, social media, to see kind of who's doing some of the announcements, who are the quotes coming from, when they're saying, like, we made this sponsorship decision because XYZ, chances are that person is probably in a position where they can actually have the authority to say yes, and that they have budget dollars to allocate. So you might actually find some success there as well. But it does take some digging. This is not something where, even with all of the resources that I'm mentioning, there's no one place where you can just hit print and it comes out with a contact list. So this is a great project for volunteers, for interns, and it's something that having some of that research done ahead of time can save you. But again, this is where if you've got your companies prioritized, then you can make sure that you're spending that valuable resource time on companies that really are in your tier 1, or like Katie said, your A group. The other thing that I think, a lot of you, this might kind of be, repeating something from before, but really making multiple contacts at all companies. You never know when someone's going to shift from the community services department into marketing or vice versa, or someone jumps from marketing into the finance department or into HR. So, and a lot of the organizations, and not just the large ones, but even the smaller ones, where it's kind of like, there's a few people that are jack of all trades, and so they're doing, they're wearing 15 different hats and they're doing 15 different jobs. Making multiple contacts at those companies can make a big difference in your retention efforts in particular. And then really also, I don't know, Katie, if you want to talk a little bit about recruitment committees and the power that can bring to your sponsorship sales.
Absolutely. So creating some of those corporate recruitment committees can absolutely help with your prospect list building and opening some of those doors and really utilizing your volunteers to do some of this digging. In the past, I remember always thinking I needed that C-suite executive who would make all my dreams come true in terms of engaging their corporate connections to be sponsors and teams and so on and so forth. So I often felt like if I don't have that one person, that I really had no opportunity to build my corporate platform. But just because we don't have that one end-all be-all person doesn't mean that we can't have a strategy to increase our corporate footprint. We can start with a few people who have access to decision makers and who are really passionate about our work and utilize them to create some inroads with your prospect list as well as to add on to it. And that can be done with them opening some doors in terms of getting you that one-on-one meeting. It could be hosting an Ask event where they can learn a little bit about your mission and inviting their prospects to become a part of that. It can look a variety of different ways depending on your relationship with that person and your platform, but it certainly allows you to kind of start from the ground and build your corporate footprint up from the ground up. You also want to share your prospect list with these types of committees to help make connections. I like to bring my prospect list to any and all meetings just in case it becomes appropriate, so you can break it out if it's really amazing that people don't really connect the people in their social network with what they do. It's that personal connection. So sometimes when you can break out that list and say, we're really looking to work with these 10 companies, do you know somebody, their best friend works there, or their uncle, or whoever that might look like, or maybe perhaps that's one of their vendors. So it can really help kind of break down that barrier and that glazed over look of, I don't really know anybody, when we know that they have some of those connections. Sometimes you can also get a lead in by kind of starting with HR to do a lunch and learn to help people understand the value of your organization. But that also, you're providing value to them before you're even having that introductory meeting. That can also help you identify perhaps an internal champion that can help bring you to the top. More and more companies are seeing value in the need for wellness activities and those team building opportunities. And our peer-to-peer events are really excellent free company picnics and ways to, increase their morale and give the company different opportunities to engage their staff and the folks that they're doing business with. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the how.
Yeah, before we move on, just quickly, sorry, wanted to give a shout out to Nathan and Amy. They came up with the name Chris Kattan is the other guy in the photo, in case that was bugging anybody else besides me.
Well played.
And then also Amy had a follow-up question. Any thoughts on breaking into a saturated market? We have a small area we can solicit, and there are so many nonprofits in the area. Any suggestions there?
I think you have to, if you're, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think when it comes to a saturated market, you really have to figure out what is the one thing that kind of sets your people apart. Is it that they come from a specific area of town that maybe you can then focus in on retailers or services that are provided in that area? Is there something special about that group that they have more more needs by a specific type of industry or company? Maybe they, tend to move a lot more because of their careers. So maybe you could look at more real estate companies and remodeling organizations or even schools. And, you have to figure, I think the big thing there when you're looking at a saturated market is figuring out what makes your audience special. Why would they be of particular interest to a potential sponsor or a few sponsors, because that's the part that's going to set you apart. If you just go in with we're having another walk and it's 500 people or it's 100 people, that kind of thing, you're absolutely right. At that point, you're just competing on the numbers. What you have to compete on is your knowledge of your community, the loyalty of that community, and really knowing, where do they shop? What do they do? Where do they spend their money? What's important to them? Is it education for their kids? Is it job searches? Is it their homes? Is it their vehicles? Those kind. Is it buying all organic foods? And that's something that seems to be extremely prevalent in your group. It's just really a matter of understanding what makes you different, because once you find your niche, that's what everybody's really trying to do. I think less and less they're looking for the events where it's 25,000 people, but they're not sure if any of their people are in the crowd, versus an event with 100 people, but they know those are their 100 people. So I would say go back to your core, go back to your people, do some surveys, do in-person interviews, really start to understand, do you see some trends within your folks and that you can leverage somehow.
And I think once you identify those trends, it's looking at who do you already have at the table that can help make those warm connections, so that you can get front and center in front of those people and they can understand the value of the resources that you provide versus those competing organizations. Any other questions before we move to the next piece that have come in, Mark?
That's it for the moment.
All right. So we are going to dig into the how. And when we think about, we've gotten that first meeting, we're really excited, our warm lead has turned into that face-to-face meeting, and you want to think, what do we bring to that party? So we want to think about the fact that we really need to stop gripping onto that deck, right? When we think about what we want to bring, we can tend to become paralyzed by the fundraising or those sponsorship levels and what sits underneath that. And that can kind of break our creativity and the uniqueness that we can offer an organization. So first, we really want to have that exploratory meeting where we're not selling anything. We're really there to sit back and listen, and really get a sense of their philanthropic goals, and then be able to go back and refine that deck to fit what you heard that day. That deck at the end should be much more collaborative, and that package can be built together, and it should be really unique. And you want to think about what are the interests and needs of your company, and how can we help support those? So like I said, that first meeting needs to always be a discovery meeting. You want to get to know them, and leave your pitch behind and leave that sponsorship packet behind, because it's really, like Rachel mentioned earlier, it's a dance and it's a process. And sometimes slow and steady really wins that long term. Because if you can really create that unique experience for them, they're going to get a better return on their investment, which is going to lead to more dollars and more participation and more trust on their part that we have their interests front and center as well. You also want to think about what do you need to close that sale once you do move forward in that process. Think about that first initial meeting. You don't want to go in there with an overwhelming amount of stuff, like every brochure that your company has ever made, or your organization. You want to go in there with things that are going to be insightful that you can kind of walk through them with, talking about your demographics and your reach, and being able to very precisely help them feel the impacts that your fundraising dollars have on your community. But you want really this piece to be so much less about you and so much more about them that that piece is very, very minimal. And we also just wanted to mention too that this process definitely doesn't start with a mass packet mailing. This is relationship building. It's not transactional. So we want all of those sponsorship meetings to be face-to-face in a multi-meeting process. And Rachel, I know you had something to add on there.
I think this comes back to just prioritizing leads and making sure that you're thinking through your warm leads versus your cold leads, and having a place to start a real dialogue with people. I think the one big thing, too, that I want to stress with this is, like you were saying, Katie, with shipping out mass amounts of packets and that kind of thing, that really almost assumes that sponsorships are transactional in the way that they happen instead of relational. And I think of sponsorships more like a major donor activity versus a direct mail situation. So you really want to think through what your process looks like and how you're getting in front of those folks, and then really thinking through what you want to ask. You know, I love the quote that you can tell how smart a person is by the questions that they ask more so than the answers that they give. And so I think really having this, you know, kind of being prepared for those meetings ahead of time, knowing what you want to bring, like Katie said, being thoughtful about that process, but then also knowing what you want to ask, what you want to leave with, what do you want to know about them after that meeting that you didn't know before. And then the other thing that I would stress too here, and then this goes back to that idea of having multiple checkpoints within an organization, is making sure that you have, if you have other employees or other connections to that company, that when you're meeting with them, you're sending notes and saying, hey, I'm meeting with Mary today. If you see her in the hallway, be sure to mention XYZ about our program. Or, you know, if you have someone else in the organization, send them a couple of talking points, because this is just like with radio or anywhere else. The more frequent that they hear the message, the better your chances for success are.
Great, and now we're going to move on to the what, an asset inventory.
So one of the things
you were going to talk
about
Project Hope.
Yeah, absolutely. So working with Project Hope was a really interesting experience for me, because it forced us to think very creatively about the asset inventory process. And I think sometimes we go, and this is again goes back to Katie's point about not gripping onto that deck. Sometimes we think about very traditional benefits and all of the activation opportunities instead of really thinking creatively. So when we started talking with Project Hope about all of the things that they really did have to sell or have to offer to their sponsors, we were able to come up with a pretty extensive list of folks that they could, or things that they could offer to them. So it made it a lot more interesting. When they went into those meetings, it wasn't that they had all of those assets listed out as a checklist, but what they did do was they kind of had those things in their back pocket, so that if for some reason a sponsor prospect mentioned, oh, I'm really interested in XYZ, they were able to then, you know, say, oh, by the way, we know that we have this volunteer mail out that we do twice a year. It goes to 5,000 people. What about doing something with that? It's not always directly related to the event that they're sponsoring, but it might in some way be really valuable. So thinking through your asset inventory, you know, in some cases, I sold an event sponsorship once to someone. They didn't even want anybody at the events. They just actually wanted access to our board. So I was able to offer that as an asset, because that was just a target market that they were trying to reach. So I would encourage everyone to think through kind of that asset inventory process. So I don't know, Katie, you had a really great story that you were telling me about Jacksonville that I think people would, because it tied in both the asset inventory as well as the benefits delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we were trying to get creative with an automobile company about how we had always had their cars on site, but we really wanted people to experience their cars because they were sponsoring at such a large level. So one of the things we did is we had their small vehicle kind of backed up to our T-shirt area. We had all of our small T-shirts in their smallest vehicle, and the mediums in their mid-size car, and so on and so forth. So as people were coming up, it ended up generating more traffic to people really being able to see and feel their product, but it also brought people in to kind of talk to some of their sales folks, and they saw a bigger, you know, return on investment that year in terms of people who said, oh yeah, you know, I saw you at the walk and, you know, decided that I wanted to come in and see you. But it was also a really fun experience for the participants too, because it was a little bit more engaging. So when you're thinking about the walk day experience, it's really helping them build out how do you make it interactive and fun, and how do you get people to their area so they can experience that brand.
I love that idea. The other thing that on the next slide, when we talk about the what, we talk once about, you know, we talk a little bit about asset inventory. The next thing I want to talk about is our value proposition. A lot of times we go in with, whether it's our cover letters, it's our emails, it's our scripts in our first initial meetings, and we really lead with things like our vision and mission statement for the organization, or we talk about our strategic priorities for the organization, and we kind of miss an opportunity there to talk about what is the value specifically to the sponsor. What is the value of our organization to them? Not what is the value of them to us. Yes, if they sponsor our event, we would have more money and we could cure cancer, or we could help people with bleeding disorders. But more importantly, when we're trying to pitch it and we're trying to get that sale, what is it that we have to offer them? So as an example, when I was working with Nike, back in 2003, one of the things we could have easily walked into some of those meetings and said, we have, 50,000 people currently in our database, and we have this series of events and this, that, and the other. But what was more important at the time for our pitch to Nike was, we know for a fact that there are 28 million cancer survivors in the U.S., and we think that you can help us reach them, and we can galvanize, if we work together, that entire community. And then we would be able to communicate with them about all things Nike, all things Livestrong. And so that was the value. Our value to them wasn't about the specific events or the assets, but was more about what we could be for them, which was a way to really identify a completely new market and then build products and services around that. So I think when you're thinking about your value proposition, and I'll share with you guys in a little bit, there's another resource that I wanted to mention, which is we have an on-demand training program, Charity Revenue Lab, and there's a whole section just about value proposition and how to write your value proposition so that when you're calling someone and leaving a voicemail, you have confidence that it's not just a charity, leaving, someone asked earlier about, market saturation. If everyone's calling to say my walk is October 5th or my cycling event or my this or my cross-country tour is on November 5th and we'd love you to sponsor, they probably get 100 of those messages. The one that's going to stand out is the one that says, I know, I actually left this message. I counted up the number of Cadillacs in a parking lot one year at a golf event, and then I called the Cadillac dealership and their co-op group, and I basically said, I know that out of the 200 cars in our parking lot for the golf tournament, we only had 25 Cadillacs. Based on your normal market numbers, you guys should have at least 50 in the parking lot. It seems like there's an opportunity here. Give me a call back. At that point, they didn't care what charity I represented or what event it was. What they knew was that there was somebody that cared about Cadillacs in a parking lot and wanted to help them figure that out and identify some sales opportunities for their people. So I think you need to think, if you think through some of that value proposition before you make the calls, before you have the meetings, you will have a much easier time with those conversations as they go. The other thing that I wanted to mention too is, and I think Katie, just for time's sake, one of the things that she mentioned specifically around this slide was making sure that you're also talking to your programs team, looking at your database information, doing database appends, surveys, really understanding the demographics of your audience, and not just the demographics, but the psychographics as well, so that you can best represent them and you can understand where and how you might be able to leverage those. The other thing here too is that, just how to determine your ask. I think if you follow the process that we mentioned earlier, where you really are using those first few meetings for more of a discovery, and you find yourself in an opportunity to not just be presenting them with a proposal, but actually building a proposal with them. So using things like a proposal memo where you say, I'm going to jot down some ideas, but let's have a call where we actually walk through it together, or a meeting where we walk through it together and edit it on the screen together. By the time you get to an actual proposal, they've already actually co-authored it, and they're already going to be in support of it. So, hedge your bets a little bit, try to get them involved, and your chances of success are going to be much greater from that standpoint. And then the other thing from a what scenario is, really thinking through, and I'll let Katie kind of cover this one, but this idea of like, what's the best and the worst case scenario that can happen? Sometimes with sponsorships, a part of it that I've found is just people not even, just being a little fearful of getting out there and making that ask and putting themselves in front of those companies where maybe that's not where you came from and it's just not an area where you're familiar with, but really thinking through the best and worst case scenario, I think, can be really important.
Yeah, and it's definitely important to imagine the yes, but prepare for that no. If you're only hearing no, we want to think about where are things falling flat, and perhaps either your research or your delivery or in that first meeting. And we want to understand the importance of the process to know where you might be falling short so you can make some adjustments to have a stronger pitch. Because we want to find the right partners and we want to find the right package for that person. But on the flip side, if you're not hearing no at all, then we're not doing our due diligence and really extending our reach far enough. Because if you aren't hearing no, maybe perhaps we're not reaching out as far as we could go. And if you are hearing no, at minimum, you've raised awareness. You might find that they fit better elsewhere within your organization or another event. But be sure to ask them why, and then maybe ask about an advisory role. People love to give feedback and be heard, and that can help keep them engaged as well. Let's talk about some key takeaways. All right, Rachel, you were going to start with key takeaway number 1 and number 2.
Okay, perfect. So the things that I wanted to cover here, just as a reminder of stuff that we've covered. The first one is really knowing who to ask first, second, and third, making sure you're prioritizing your people and that you have not just a prospect list, but a prospect list that is going to give you the easiest wins the earliest. Because one, that obviously boosts your confidence, it makes your finance people happy, but it will also really be, having the greatest chance for success. The next one is really understanding all of the resources that you have available to you, not just your team, but also the extended team, your board members, your volunteers, your participants, etc. So trying to really make use of all of those folks, and everything that's at your disposal would be really important as far as that's concerned. And the last one, too, that I wanted to cover, number 3, is enjoy the process. We mentioned it's a slow dance, it's a process, it's not a race, those kinds of things. This can be really fun. This is where you get to know people. I am friends with sponsors that I sold in '97 for a festival sponsorship, and we still talk on kind of a monthly or quarterly basis. And so I would just suggest to you that this whole process can be something where you're really just getting to know someone and you're getting to enjoy understanding their business, learning a new business, and then also them learning more about you, not just your organization that you represent, but you as a person as well, because there may be more times in the future for them to be able to cross your path. And so with that, I'll kind of hand it over to Katie to answer or kind of cover the last few key takeaways, and then we'll open it up for questions for the last 5 minutes.
Great. So we talk a lot about, every sponsor proposal should be unique to the company goals. That's how we can make that mutually beneficial, increase that chance of getting that yes. Also understanding your reach and your demographics. Be aware of all the features and benefits that there are, not just within your event program, but within your organization. And be open to getting creative to make it really align with the product or service, so it's impossible for them to say no. And of course, too, we think you guys are awesome. And this is where we have so much potential to grow as an industry. It's no longer the days of please give to us because it's the right thing to do. Partnering with peer-to-peer events really hold huge value to corporate partners. You've all created these relationships and connections. You're laying that groundwork, and now it's time to take it to the next level, which we're really excited about.
There was a question. Any thoughts on figuring out how much money to pursue for a sponsorship from a company?
I think there's a couple of things that I would suggest here. Obviously, doing some research on what have they given in the past. You can look at other folks' annual reports. You can look at other events and kind of where someone kind of fits in the T-shirt rankings, if you will, or where their logo fits on the posters, or how much presence they have on a website. So you have a general idea of, are they at a $5,000, $25,000, or $250,000 sponsorship range. You can also look at their financial records if it's a publicly held company, so that you can get a sense for, what maybe they have the capacity to do in the past. The other thing is I've always been of the mindset too of in some cases when you can't find the information, ask. So reaching out to someone and just saying, our sponsorship opportunities range from the $10,000 to $50,000 range. If you'll let me know where you're at budget-wise, I'd love to build a package that suits you. And then that's just a starting ground. I usually do that with somebody that's a first-year potential partner, and that way it's a place for us to start. But then they also know that there's room to move up, and I can figure out where we can add value and continue to add money for the next year or the third year. So that's another way to go about kind of figuring that piece out. The other thing I'll tell you is, I've been in situations where I had a $25,000 proposal in my purse when I went into the meeting, and I chose not to pull it out, and instead I asked them for $75,000 and I got it. So you also have to just have a gut feeling for where you're at and how much you're worth to them. As an example, if you know that chances are because of you, they're going to sell 5 more cars, and on average, each car is worth a net value of $5,000 to them, then you know what the value of the sponsorship is. So even if they are looking for a 2-for-1 return, then you know what in a ballpark range they might be willing to pay. So instead of thinking about it in our ranges and in our packets and our levels, think about it into what this is valuable, what value this has for them. Katie, I don't know if you had anything else to add to that one.
No, I think that was perfect.
The only other thing, too, I don't know, Mark, if we have any other questions, but I did want to mention, and I don't know, Katie, if it's possible to show the slide with the Charity Revenue Lab, but if anyone's interested in more in-depth training, one of the things that I put together with the team at ACG about a year ago was a 5-module training program that's on demand, so you can get on there, look at all of our templates, our scripts, the forms that we use, the benefits charts, the decks, the meeting agendas, everything from start to finish on selling sponsorship. So if that's of interest to anyone, feel free to check it out, or if you have any questions for me, please, feel free to let me know. Our contact information is on the deck that'll be available on the conference website as well. And I'll hand it over to Mark to answer any other, or I guess see if there's any other questions that folks have.
Not seeing any. Any last call for any questions? Oh, we do, let's see. We have one sponsorship never sold yet that has a starting cost of $15K. But I think Amy got, we make it scalable, I think is what Amy's saying there. Not sure if there's a question.
If it's a $15,000 sponsorship and it's never been sold, one of the things that I love to do is actually reach out. I mean, this goes back to the old fundraising, motto of if you want advice, ask for money. If you want money, ask for advice. If I have a level that for whatever reason we cannot get sold time after time, I'll actually pull together a small advisory group, or I'll just take a few sponsors that don't even sponsor my events, but I know they sponsor other stuff in town, and I'll say, can you just look at this and give me feedback? Am I missing something on the benefits? Am I missing something on the pricing? What is it exactly that we're missing the mark on here?
Good stuff. Not seeing any questions, so want to go ahead and wrap this up. Just let everybody know that the next session is at 1:30 with Twilio.org and talking with case study about Team Rubicon. So that should be an SMS text to give. So looking forward to that session as well. I want to thank Rachel and Katie. Their contact information is on the line, and thank everybody for attending. The recordings will be available up on the website here very shortly. So thanks to everybody.